Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. We are back in the Billy Meier case. If you wondered where I've been working about 70 hours a week. I got in about 68, almost 69 hours a week on the day job. So we are holding on by a thread as far as all of my other interests are concerned. And the knowledge of striving surely comes in handy, as well as the information on neutral positive thinking in situations like this. So bear with me. I do the best I can under these kind of circumstances. Billy has a book, and I think it's called Meditation from Clear Visibility. And there is some of that book available up on the Freedom of Future of Mankind site. So I thought I would read just a little bit of that to start the show out. And this has to do with controlling our thoughts. So I'll read a little bit of this and then cover some of the things that are mentioned here. It says, the true richness of the meditative basis for a positive consciousness attitude rests in the true insight, in the true knowledge, experience, and living experience that the omnipotence of one's own thoughts and feelings steers all functions and processes of the entire life. Opposed to this stands the blind belief in an all-directing God and in calamity-averting amulets, magical talismans, cult activities, and hallowed cult shrines, holy rituals and relics, consecrated shrines, hallowed and holy water, holy hosts and wines, etc. Knowledge is, in its essence, wisdom and positive neutral might. Belief, by contrast, is a lack of understanding and a phenomena of thought, feeling-based as well as psychic consciousness-based misdirected mechanisms without cognizance with regards to the creational spiritual and creational natural laws and recommendations. Hence, it clearly and definitely follows that cognition, knowledge, practical experience, living experience, and wisdom are alone the true factors which exhibit real values and are evolutively effective and form a positive basis for a positive consciousness attitude. While in contrast to this, the belief is a way to the destruction and the de-evolution and leads into delusion and confusion, as well as into a disturbed consciousness attitude. A meditative basis for a positive consciousness attitude consists in the value and the consciousness when it is steered by corresponding meditative thoughts and feelings and is consciously formed. The meditative form, as well as consists therein that certain thoughts are consciously cultivated again and again, through which corresponding feelings are released, which manifest themselves beneficially and in a positive, equalized manner in the psyche, and form this whereby the consciousness is stimulated. In the same wise, and a conscious positive consciousness attitude emerges. The meditative thoughts and feelings are thereby cultivated again and again by thinking or muttering several times daily, 4 times a specific sentence for about 5 minutes, and practicing conscious attentiveness on that which is spoken. The one and same sentence can find application for a single day or for several days as required, or for as long and often until the content of the sentence has become a conscious matter of course. Thereby, the meditative basis for a positive consciousness attitude can become a long process, which can claim several months or even a whole year. Naturally, it does not occur in the manner for this entire time. Only a single sentence finds application for the meditative basis of the consciousness attitude, because truthfully, the entire allotted work of the points of meditative use comprise of 77, which little by little must find usage in order to achieve the entire extent of the goal. With these 77 points, the aim is therefore to learn to trust one's own potential, as well as to get rid of anxiety, to live with oneself in peace, and to enjoy the life in abundance. Also integrated is one's own elevation, as well as the health and vitality, the finding of creative solutions to problems, the right cultivation of thoughts, and a successful life. The hereto necessary 77 steps of the meditative cultivation of thoughts and feelings are divided into the following sentences. And these are what I want to get into. Now listen to how profound these are and how effective these can be if you repeat them. And there's 2 of these which have stuck with me that I've used many times when you get into those very, very difficult, challenging situations. But I'll read through some of these, not all 77. Don't worry, I've read a lot already, and I probably shouldn't read that much. You guys can read for yourself. But in order to live in today's world, I must be strong and develop tenacity with regard to my consciousness and my intellect. 2, the calmer and more tenacious I become, the more I overcome difficulties. 3, the creational natural power is within myself, and I use this actualizingly in my thinking and acting. 4, in my consciousness attitude, I change myself to the positive and utilize my creational natural power in me for this. 5, I am strong within myself and change my mental self-image to the positive. 6, now this is one of the ones I use. Everything is achievable for me, and I master whatever I wish to accomplish. Everything is achievable for me, I'm repeating, and I master whatever I wish to accomplish. 7, I always elevate my view, recognize all possibilities, and I am a positive thinker. And if I can find it quickly, I'll read to you the other one that I use. Well, I'm not seeing it quickly, so that'll be another one for another day. But those are this meditation from clear visibility, the 77 points. These little, what you do is you say these when your thoughts have gone completely out of control, and you need to pull them back into line. One of the things I've been reading in the past 3 or 4 shows are the little introduction to the contact reports, which is an article Billy wrote called "How It All Began," and it's a story about young Billy Meier when he was growing up in northern Switzerland, in Belloc, Switzerland, and I think it was 1941. very warm May night, he crawled out a lower window in his bedroom and looked up at a beautiful starry sky. And, well, this is what he experienced. This is already at the age of 4. This great recognition instantly changed my life. Because after I was familiarized with this insight and understanding by means of the impulses of the storage banks, and also learned who I really was, what I had to learn and do in my life, and what my life task was, I looked at human beings, animals, and nature, as well as all existing things, in a completely new way, and I suddenly felt a great astonishment within myself about that, which I now discovered. I suddenly saw myself in everything. Now, by the way, the storage banks store information. We have universal storage banks. You think of a library. A library stores physical books. The storage banks store energetic information about your life, about my life, about our thoughts. Information about the collective subconsciousness of humanity is stored in these storage banks. Well, there are also storage banks for the planet, for the solar system, for the galaxy, and of course for the universe. And this is the universal consciousness signaling back to the individual with information. And it could be information from previous lives. It could be information that's just kind of being broadcasted. And it may be something that you can utilize in your life, or it may be something that you've just never ever even thought of before. And it has to do with our thinking and the way we think and what, I hate this word, vibration, vibratory level of our thinking, what frequency we're thinking at. And if our mind is tuned in, we can get information from these storage banks. One of the things, and this is kind of a conclusion that Billy has drawn in many of his writings, that comes, and I'm not here yet. I've never been to this point, but this is something that he said that I think is very significant and important to look at. He said, I suddenly saw myself in everything, in every fellow human being, in every flower or in a plant, in every tree and shrub, in every animal and snow and water, in the earth, in the lightning and the thunder and clouds and wind and in sunshine. Because everything was and is connected in true creational love and forms a unity with each other. And exactly as a result of this connection, which was instantly clear to me, everything is mixed and connected in infinitely various ways, through which innumerable manifestations of life and existences were created, exist, and will continue to be created. I'll go on here to the next paragraph here. Within a few moments, I understood everything. Now, that's a big, profound statement, and I must say that I am not there yet. I was excited with joy and peace and harmony spread within me, but also the deepest deference and modesty before the creational mightiness and infinite true love. Then days and years later, I tried to explain to my parents and neighbors everything that had come about within me during that night, because I had a very great need to report and to explain what cognitions I had gained. I could hardly wait to communicate this to my fellow human beings, but the opportunity to do so was not granted to me. There was simply no words for me to explain myself, and there were no human beings who understood what I, as a little boy, tried to explain to them. Parents, relatives, neighbors, teachers, and other fellow human beings only saw how I changed more and more. However, they did not perceive that my eyes and my voice emitted something which was foreign to them. They only noticed that I became more and more modest, and that I did not condemn anything or anyone, and that I always gave what I could give. I became a human being who was no longer the same as the others, one who was still young in years and yet already old in his cognitions. I could understand fellow human beings very well, even to old people. I could give good advice, for they were very grateful. But nobody was in a position to understand me, except for Pastor Rudolf Zimmermann. Some thought I was a loner. Others compared me to a sage, but nobody understood what actually went on inside me, what kinds of thoughts and feelings I had, and what my real desire was: to be able to intelligibly transmit my cognition and knowledge to other human beings. My thoughts led me to the cognition that essentially every human being should see himself in his fellow human beings, as I saw myself in all other human beings. But nobody ever thinks to do this. Every human being lives only for himself and his own welfare, unless out of some kind of feeling-based love or emotional love, or perhaps really out of true love, he forms a connection with someone else. Thus it became clear to me that I had to assume the responsibility of my task and dedicate my life to it. In order to give human beings understanding and to teach them what they dream up are unreal things, and indeed, without consciousness and without comprehending what and who they really are, and to teach them for which purpose they eke out their life on earth. Thus the human being has to learn to know himself, and to not behind the fog and the smoke, and not believe that life can thereby be lived successfully and progressively. Hence the saying shall be uttered, that is very easy to go through life without perception and with closed eyes, and to disregard and misunderstand everything which nevertheless is seen out of the corner of one's eye. One of the most profound writings of the Meier case, I am certain of this. It's called How It All Began. You can find it up on the Future of Mankind site. These are some of the most profound writings on the planet. If you've listened to this show, then you may think that as well. So Billy's spirit form is very ancient. According to the Meier information, his spirit form is 9.6 billion years old. It has lived through all of the evolutionary steps before and has come back again into a physical body here on Earth to be what's called the universal prophet. It's so strange to hear him speak because he's always down to earth, especially in his older age. He's a little less profound, I think, at 80 than he was at 40 and 50 and 60. At least that's the impression I get. Now, that may be completely untrue. He probably just is different on different days, just like everyone else. It depends on what interview you are watching or listening to at a particular time. We've been talking about the German terms a lot, and I've been going over what creation is. The universal consciousness is a neutral positive entity. It created the universe for the purpose of its own evolution. It is not a heavenly father. It doesn't throw people in a hell or put you in a heaven. However, you do, after many, literally billions of years of evolution, some of which we have a physical body during, and some of it we don't. There are 7 evolutionary steps that human beings go through. The first stage is primitive life. The second is rational life. The third is intelligent life. The fourth is real life. The fifth is life and creational wisdom. Now, you'll have to look these stages up. It's in one of the contact reports. I think it might be contact report 6. And I kind of shortened the names of these stages for my own memory purpose. Now, the Pleiaren are in the 5th stage of evolution. This is just before people go into the half spiritual, half physical stage. They're so advanced they can't stand to be around us. I'll put it that way. Our thoughts are very dangerous to them, very repugnant to them. It's against their rules and regulations to make contact with us because of that. So the plan was probably 13,000 years old or older, that this very ancient spirit form would come back on the earth in a whole series of reincarnations in a physical body. He would affect society in various ways. In some lives, he would be a musician. In a composer. In some lives, he would be an astronomer like Galileo. But most importantly, he has been a prophet and a teacher. He's been the people that we call Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel, and Muhammad. Now, if you look in your New Testament, you're going to hear a lot about a person called Jesus. Well, a shocking fact is there was no letter J in the ancient world. The letter J didn't exist until about 1550. A guy named Gian Giorgio Torricino, an Italian scholar, invented the letter J. He was a playwright also. And he started substituting the letter J for the letter I and the letter Y. So right around the 1500s, our writings went through this transformation. So in the ancient world, a person might be called Yeshua but that's not the best example. For example, Julius Caesar wasn't called Julius in the ancient world. This is kind of a change that took place. For example, the book of Job today was originally the book of Iob. So the letter J was inserted at about 1550. It became popular for whatever reason. So, for example, in the New Testament, the apostles John and James were not called John and James when they were alive. They were called names that are just about unpronounceable for us, that began with a Y. So what we consider today our profound writings have been retranslated and remessed with and changed. And this is an unfortunate fact, and something that I didn't really believe until I discovered it for myself. And it's a really an amazing thing when you do the study for yourself. If perhaps I will do just that. We'll take a little tangent. The First Council of Nicaea occurred in AD 325, and the Roman Emperor Constantine was involved in this. And what he did was Constantine said, okay, we're going to make the Roman Empire Christian. So we're going to get together all of our teachers of Christianity, all of our popes, all of our bishops. We're going to get them together, and we're going to agree on the books of the Bible. We're going to agree on what this fellow's name was. That was the first big controversy they had. So let me read a little bit. Up until the First Council of Nicaea, the Roman aristocracy primarily worshipped Apollo and Zeus. And a great bulk of the common people idolized either Julius Caesar or Mithras. Now, here's an interesting thing. The past was very strange and very different by our perspective. Let me continue here. Constantine's intention at Nicaea was to create. Now, this is from a website called Yahweh.com, which I found real interesting. Was to create a new God for his empire, who would unite all the religious factions under one deity. And the delegates that he brought together at the Council of Nicaea argued among themselves for a long time. There were howling and heated debates, and the names of 53 gods were put up for discussion. Well, his delegate couldn't come up to agree. They were trying to agree on the name of the person today that is called Jesus Christ. And the name that they came up with, the official name of the Roman God, was Jesus Krishna. And keep in mind now, there was no letter J in alphabets until much, much later. There was no letter J in the Old English even. If you look up, and you can do this for yourself, if you look up in the Old English, there was no letter J. It didn't exist. So the first translation of the Bible in the King James 1611 version, or in the Gutenberg Bible and other Bibles that were very, very ancient, he was called our Lord and Savior, IESVS, many times. And as I said before, the book of Job was the book of IOB. James and John had different names. There was no name Jesus in the ancient world because there was no letter J at that time. There was no letter J in the ancient world. It didn't come around until about 1550 or so. The letter J did not exist, and you can verify this for yourself in the Hebrew and the Greek and Aramaic or any other language in the world. What they did is when the letter J was invented, they made a modification to the Latin I. And right around 1550, as I was telling you about. So, the Greek spelling for what we call Jesus today began with the letter I. However, it was pronounced with a Y, like Jesus. The Latin, likewise, or IESUS. And there is an interesting article on the name Jesus. Interesting. The name Jesus is a kind of hybrid that has no distinctive etymological root meaning. And the letter J really didn't come about until 1550 when Gian Giorgio Torrissino invented it, and then right around the time of Christopher Columbus, they started referring to him as Jesus, right around the 16th century or so, 1600 years after his birth. You see, the classical Latin did not have a distinct J sound. The J, as we know in English, was typically a Y. For example, it wasn't Julius Caesar, it was Julius Caesar. And if you look in the King James Version, the very first one, you have to get a hold of an original ancient Bible. I have a link where people can look if they want. it will say our Lord and Savior, i.e. SVS Christ, because there was no letter J at the time. Some say in June in 1632, in a court document in England, was the first where it really started to catch on. The name was spelled this way in an official lawsuit filed due to poor translation and printing quality of Bibles by a pair of owners of a print shop who were printing for profit and not for quality. The pair were sued for printing subpar quality and lost, having to pay a fine. But the spelling, which occurred just one time in that Bible, was Jesus, and it remained and became part of the Western brand name. So, this is a very strange history we have here. The letter J originated as the long I, and is used for the letter I at the end of Roman numerals. A swash letter, for example, is a fancy letter called a typographical flourish, such as an exaggerated serif. Anyway, Sarah, the Old English alphabet consisted of the following letters: A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, no J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, no U, V, no W, X, Y, Z, ampersand, question mark, and a few other strange symbols. There was no W, there was no J, or no U in the Old English. And there's a really good film out on YouTube. So anyway, as I said before, Gian Giorgio Torricino was the man who is given credit for inventing the letter J. And he was still alive around 1540 to 1550. The letter J kind of emerged as a fancy I. And some scholars will tell you the letter J was actually a mistake. Does the letter J exist in Hebrew, Latin, or Greek, which are the languages of the Bible? No. The letter J never existed in any language on earth until about 1500 or so. The letter J still does not exist in the Hebrew language either. So we mispronounce all the names of the Hebrew prophets. For example, Elijah was actually known as Elijah, and the person we call Enoch was known as Henoch. In the original language, Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, which provide us with the names what we call Jesus and Joseph and Justinian today, were pronounced with the letter I, were not pronounced with the letter J. This is a very, very long story. I could continue. It's fascinating, and it's really worth talking about in a little more detail. But I imagine some of you will say you've heard it all before. So in any sense, I wanted to get to the might of thoughts because that's where the rubber meets the road, I guess, so to speak. The thing we have to deal with. And I came back to page 142. I'm reading this book for the fourth time. Still trying to be able to apply what it says. Understand what it says is also a challenge in some places. But good thoughts lead to good feelings, which lead to good habits, which lead to good circumstances in your life. So everybody wants good circumstances in their life. Well, if you have bad thoughts, they lead to bad feelings, bad habits, and bad circumstances in your life. The problem is not only the bad thoughts we know about, but we have bad thoughts we don't know about, which rummage around in the unconscious and sometimes in the subconscious. So lower thoughts form lower feelings, lower habits, and lower circumstances. such as alcoholism, hate, affliction, resentment, sorrow, grief, bitterness, errors of judgment, and so forth, and many kinds of suffering. If one's thoughts are destructive, then they crystallize into confusing and exhausting habits and circumstances, which the human being who is afflicted by them is no longer able to control. The bad and confusing habits and circumstances harden, and soon thoughts of fear, of doubt, and of indecision arise, whereby already after a relatively short time everything becomes automatic and all processes thereby run unconsciously. And what happens is these thoughts, these negative thoughts, they run automatically in your unconscious mind, and they repeat and they repeat and they repeat, and they filter up to your conscious mind, and you find yourself thinking about the same thing over and over and over again. You can't stop. That's how people become mentally ill and need medication. Well, the idea is to recognize that this is happening and start to correct this whole negative process which goes on and on and on. From the circumstances and habits which have arisen from that in that way, new circumstances arise which harden into failure, impoverished thinking, and dependency, and so forth. Also, anxiety, fear, and panic can arise from that if wrong convictions are created and one lives the experience of them. But wrong habits are able to develop and harden into the habits of uncleanliness and unhonesty, while thoughts of hate and disdain form into habits, convictions, and lived practical experiences of such a wrong form that accusations, Gewalt, injury, and persecution arise from that. Selfish thoughts of every kind cause all altruistic factors to think. And instead of altruism, they promote selfishness and egoism, as well as many other tormenting circumstances and habits. The might of the thoughts, namely, has an effect everywhere, thus in the positive just as in the negative. Accordingly, beautiful, good, and positive thoughts of every kind form habits and circumstances as well as convictions and experiences worth living, of grace and kindness, of cheerfulness and moderateness, modesty and self-control. But constructive thoughts also generate and strengthen the human being's calmness, love, peace, and effective courage, as well as his or her reliability and ability to make decisions. But also the feeling of responsibility and one's inner innate and real freedom fully crystallize from that. But neutral, positive, equalized thoughts are able to create very much more yet, such as assiduousness, a sense of order, cleanness, honesty, gentleness, feelings for others, and a readiness to help, and so on and so forth. Thus, good and healthy positive thoughts harden into circumstances and convictions, as well as into lived experience of an all-embracing, uncommonly manifold well-being, and into lived practical experience of real riches, which are not to be found in material goods, rather in the truthful values of effectively being human. Amazingly profound thoughts. I want to switch gears just quickly to one of my other favorite books called Leben, The Way to Live. And if you have a copy, in my copy it's page 102, that talks about striving. Striving creates the life right up to being. Striving means delectation in a form which is always fulfilling and progressive. To be without striving means unwillingness and affliction. Affliction is inhibited striving and inhibited life. But inhibited striving and inhibited life bring inhibited evolution and stagnation. Hopelessness and grief, confusion, irrationality, joylessness, cognitionless, unpeace, disharmony, lovelessness, resentment, lies, self-deceit, and reluctance for life. Therefore, delectation, harmony, and happiness, as well as everything positive, as well as grief and everything negative, are in the end only the positive, as well as the grief and negative are in the end only the revelation of how pronounced the striving is in any life form. So if you have negativity in your life, then you gotta get striving. Depending on the degree of the strength of the striving of any single Wesen, we're all Wesen. We have our own thoughts, our own personality. Same with your cats and your dogs. They're all Wesen, horses, all that, basically, upper animals. It will assert itself in the world and prevail. It will fall away, shatter, waste away, and come to an end and vanish. All of that depends on striving. So these are very profound bits of wisdom that if you've been given this material, if it comes into your life, it can be a tremendous help if you'll take the effort to really inculcate yourself. This show is just a kind of a start, a primer, so to speak, and then you have to kind of pick this up for yourself and run with it. Let me read a little bit from the book, The Psyche. It says, he or she should not be good and submissive in the form which the religions teach, because the way brings only the consciousness-based and bodily ruin. The creation itself demands of the spirit and of the consciousness to be positive and negative, and thereby equalized. Thereby already the irrational teachings of the religions are thereby recognizable and reveal that they are only the destructive machinations of primitive thinking human beings. The work of primitive power hunger in delusion and charlatanry. It is quite right that in certain ways specific thoughts come back identically and simply as they went out, in the sense that positive comes back as effective positive and negative as effective negative, but the process is based on a deception, and then only takes place when the thoughts lie in a relevant area that is feeling-based conditional, in which the consciousness has already accepted as cognition. So e.g., love and hatred, when they are actually and naturally in pure form. So then love can thus again be harvested for love, and hatred again for hatred. But here again, be attentive that such thinking processes are no longer purely mental, but are simply built up on feeling-based and on emotional manners. Thoughts can only be divided into two kinds, namely positive or negative. In addition to the natural minus, in wider form and relative to the thinking. Negative also means evil, ungood, negating, doubting thoughts. These undermine the morale, the psyche, and the advancement. Like magnets, they attract negative human beings who bring harm and ill will. Every form of failure and disharmony find entrance into life. Power and health become weakened, disinterest arises, and then finally everything drives toward the self-destruction. On the other hand, positive thinking or upbuilding, life-affirming, good and healthy. And by the way, in my version of the book, The Psyche, this is page 132 if you're interested and you want to read this for yourself. They form the plus and strengthen the good character, attract desired human beings, helpers, and true friends. Success, happiness become natural companions. Through the thinking, the human being fills his or her life with light or darkness, with misery and affliction, or with happiness and success. This always pursuant into the nature of the thoughts, accordingly to their type and direction. A quite distinct direction of thought and kind of thinking, evolving in a quite distinct direction, is thus called negative or positive. Every thought attracts exactly what it sends out as power. Negative or positive, exactly like a mental magnet, which attracts only metal and thus the same kind, with the distinction that the same kind must be pulled differently. When the human being turns inward towards his thinking and its power, most of the sorrowful and self-depressing experiences become unnecessary for the life. When the human being connects with their own thoughts in a good form, then their power increases immeasurably, and they raise themselves far above all influences and mights of the bodily and material world. Outer influences are able to exert might over the human being so long as these influences on the thinking are granted might. The might of the thoughts becomes tremendous richness. Richness of life, else total destruction. Richness of life, however, to say it straight away, does not consist of the stockpiling of material riches. These are only material values, which are transitory. Such riches are only sought for the sake of possessions and for the sake of prosperity. Whoever indulges in it becomes a slave to his or her possessions, obsessed with them. Naked, ego-addicted greed for possession of riches or their acquisition inevitably attracts unwanted, terrible things to oneself sooner or later. Illnesses appear, domestic misery, unfortunate, painful losses, and so that true happiness never find admittance. Well, now I realize why Billy is so anti-possessions. He's anti-materialism. Sloth always taught him to be anti-materialistic, and I've always wondered, well, why is that? What's the big deal there? I'm just not getting it. So here, again, I'll read it to you once again. Naked ego-addicted greed for possessions of riches or their acquisition inevitably attracts unwanted, terrible things to oneself sooner or later. Illnesses appear, domestic misery, unfortunate, painful losses, so that true happiness never finds admittance. That's why it's so hard, I guess, for someone who is rich to be truly happy. It is only natural and self-evident that forcibly induced or intensively and continuously wish for prosperity inevitably turn up, because with enough perseverance and effort, everything becomes reality one day, even if it is forced unrightly and through naked Gewalt. Gewalt is this super intensity that we don't even have a good English word to understand. But via the negative form comes all sorts of affliction and heavy strokes of fate, which like the hammer of a blacksmith strike upon the originator with gigantic, deadly Gewalt. This is in contrast to the conscious, positive, might-oriented thinker who is able to master his or her life rightly and healthily. He or she uses and follows only pure consciousness-based positive methods, right thinking and right deeds. Through this, the laws of life are followed, which naturally demand only the positive, yet never the negative, when a positive mode of thinking is present. Thus, also, a fully different point of origin emerges in reference to the thinking. Indeed, the wish is the same, namely to achieve richness and prosperity, but the mentality and the actual fulfillment are fundamentally different. I'm going to read a little bit of that again. Through this, the laws of life are followed, which naturally demand only the positive, yet never the negative, when a positive mode of thinking is present. Thus also a fully differentiated point of origin emerges in the reference to the thinking. Indeed, the wish is the same, namely to achieve richness and prosperity, but the mentality and actual fulfillment are fundamentally different. And precisely, the mentality is of a decisive importance for the kind of success. Whoever presses his or her thoughts into base mentality and forces them towards egotistical purposes will regret it sooner or later. Consciousness-based physical and psychical Gewalt. Consciousness-based deterioration and false thinking can never remain unpunished. Whoa, if your thinking deteriorates into this negativity, it brings punishment. They inevitably demand their tribute. And this only in the form of all imaginable terrible things that reach up to the complete self-destruction. Remorse and cognition then, unfortunately, come too late. Should a wish of any kind become realized, then the harmony of the consciousness must first be produced through a right and healthy mode of thinking. Only in this way, harmony of the consciousness, only in this way, that which is sought after is then able to become carefree reality without hindrance and bitterness. It must be clear that the consciousness itself, as is the spirit in the first place, is neither good nor evil. I mean, I really want to make that point again, and Billy said this on an interview the other day again, is the spirit is neutral. All spirits. From what I'm understanding, there is really no such thing as evil spirits. All of this is just schizophrenia, and in this whole thing with the exorcism, this is all nonsense. Okay, let me read again here. As in the spirit in the first place is neither good nor evil, but it is fully neutral positive. By the way, the universal consciousness is neutral positive. It's neither good nor evil. Primarily through the thinking process, it is filled with knowledge, cognitions, and ability, and we're talking about the spirit. In this case, the kind of thinking, positive or negative. The corresponding sense of character and the entire imprint emerge. This is how the consciousness aligns itself exactly to the kind of thinking and creates positive, negative or neutral, positive, good or evil, happiness or unhappiness, health or illness, approval or disapproval. So it's your thinking that brings approval, disapproval, happiness or unhappiness, your health or your illness. Generally speaking, it's your thinking that does it. The consciousness is the actual motor which develops, releases, and brings into the application the tremendous power which influences and brings about everything according to the mode of thinking that you have had in your life. Wow, there's another page that I'm going to mark for pages to read again in the future. That is the most profound, one of the most profound pages. And again, I'm like an advertisement here for the Billy Meier writings. The Psyche is what we were just reading from. That passage in the Psyche relates back to the Might of Thoughts book, which I'm reading for the fourth time now. And then that relates back to the Way to Live book. So these are three books that can make a tremendous difference in your life: the Psyche, the Way to Live, and the Might of Thoughts. If you take the time to read these books, and you'll profit the first time you read them, but it's not really until you go back over them that you really start to profit, and you really start to be able to analyze your own thinking when it goes astray. Well, I'm going back, I don't know, I assume maybe even tonight, back to my life of striving, which is pretty much all I've been doing the past week or two. So I hope you've enjoyed your weekend, and I probably won't be back on the air until next weekend for a short period. Have a good evening and practice the information that we've discussed tonight. Keep your thoughts neutral positive. And neutral positive, good thinking will bring good feelings and good habits and good circumstances into your life. You've been listening to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. Have a great evening. Good night.